Thanks, everybody else. So yeah, we're going to talk about the path to DeFi 3.0. I love talking about DeFi, so this one was right up my alley. Thanks, Alex, for suggesting it. A little bit about myself. My name is Kyle Bailey. I lead engineering at dYdx. We're one of the top DEXs. We do about $1 billion in transactions today, primarily through derivatives. And you can find our website at dYdx.exchange. Okay. So I'm going to assume that most people are relatively familiar with the concept of DeFi. But just as a quick primer, DeFi is just distributed applications that run directly on distributed blockchain nodes. And I don't pretend to know everything about every single project that's out there right now, but I'll try to give the best overview as I can. I'm going to be fairly brief because I'd love to start a discussion, especially since there are a few crypto skeptics here. Dr. Elkin, I'm looking at you in particular. So yeah, let's get into it. So the difference really between DeFi 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0 is really categorizing their liquidity strategy.
Can you change to full screen?
Can you say that one more time?
You share your page to share it with your full screen.
Oh, you want me to go? Okay, let me see. Let me try that. 1 second.
It's share your whole screen.
Okay, hold on 1 second.
Yes, that's good.
Is that better? Okay, cool. Yeah, so the difference between 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0 is really about categorizing their liquidity strategies. So for DeFi, the usefulness of the protocol is really tied to its liquidity. So for example, Uniswap, which is a DeFi 1.0 protocol, where you can go and swap Ethereum for USDC, for example. It only works if people are depositing Ethereum, a pair of Ethereum in USDC. Without people depositing these pairs into the protocol, then no one can use it, right? So what DeFi 1.0 was really about is how do we incentivize people to deposit their tokens? And the way they did that was by offering their own governance tokens, right? So this was a big part of DeFi Summer, where projects like SushiSwap and PancakeSwap, they offered their own token in exchange for people depositing liquidity. So the big problem here is that the liquidity is ultimately what they call mercenary liquidity. So these LPs, liquidity providers, were really hunting for the best returns, and so they weren't really loyal to any kind of any specific protocol. And also, once they received the governance tokens, they typically just sold them, right? So this was very inflationary and really dropped the prices of a lot of these governance tokens. So for DeFi 2.0, newer projects really attempted to solve this by changing their liquidity program. Olympus DAO is a good example of this. So they aimed to do what they call controlling their own liquidity. And so how that worked is you would deposit the liquidity that you provided to other assets. So like on PancakeSwap, they would give you a liquidity token that represented Ethereum and USDC, and you would deposit that into Olympus DAO, and then they would give you their governance token back. Actually, the pair was more like Ohm, which is their native token to DAI, for instance. So in order to receive their Ohm token, you essentially had to give them control of the liquidity. And this was like incredibly novel, and also very effective too. So I think today they own somewhere between 95 and 99% of all the liquidity in circulation for their own token. And I think it's something like 300 or $400 million of value today. For DeFi 3.0, they took that ownership step a little bit further. And what they're doing, what's considered farming as a service. Multi-chain capital is a good example of this. And these protocols operate more similar to index funds than they do previous protocols. So for MCC in particular, they ask you to purchase their specific token. Once you purchase their token, 8%, there's a fee charged. That fee goes into their treasury, and it's also distributed to existing token holders. And then what they do is they take that treasury money and they go and they use farming strategies on other protocols, for example, right? So they may actually deposit that money into Uniswap or Curve, for example. So it's a pretty novel concept, and it's actually been fairly slow to grow over the past 6 months as we've kind of entered a down cycle in the crypto economy. But it's very new, it's very novel, and it's very interesting as well. Go to the next page here. Okay, so what are the main problems with this? I think, in an ideal world, all these projects are essentially decentralized and automated, but we're very, very far from that right now, right? So you're essentially giving your money to someone and you're hoping that they invest on your behalf. And, as we see with Terra and Luna, there's a lot of downsides to that haven't been considered from the beginning. The other thing is risk as well too, right? So there's a lot of correlated risk with a lot of these DeFi investments. And even if the ultimate like DeFi 3.0 protocol itself is secure, you could be investing into a Luna or a Terra, and that could be essentially very insecure or risky. I actually think it's very similar to what happened with subprime mortgage-backed securities in particular. And so what's the pathway forward, right? I think that there needs to be just a lot more infrastructure being built in crypto, and that's currently taking place right now. I think that these simplifications and abstractions allow more people to participate in the crypto ecosystem, but we need to build way more systems that can automate trust and way more just automation tooling in general. The other thing is just continue to find more utility as well too, right? So if you look at multi-chain capital, for instance, it's essentially a financial product. I don't think that there's like an actual, there's not a lot of like actual use case or like business use cases there besides just providing liquidity and investments to other protocols. So I think this is going to just continue to be a theme that is constant in DeFi, because I think we're still very, very early on, but just continuing to find more utility in the space will be extremely beneficial. Okay, I'll pause there and open it up for discussion.
Any question so far? Yeah, Adrian, please.
Hey, Kyle. Yeah, thanks for presenting today, and big fan of what you guys are building at dYdx. I realized I forgot to intro myself earlier. So yeah, I'm a data scientist and member of the investment team at Standard Crypto. I think it's really interesting how we're thinking about DeFi 1.0, 2.0. Haven't heard as much about 3.0. It felt like the big innovation with DeFi 2.0 was protocol-owned liquidity. But to me, the distinction between that and really just looking at something like Olympus as a decentralized hedge fund seemed blurry at best. And it feels like multi-chain is just essentially that. It's just a decentralized hedge fund where it's kind of yearn taken to the next level, and they're just taking capital and essentially generating returns. how would you push back on that? And am I missing anything here?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. So, I mean, in the simplest terms, like in 1.0, users create their own liquidity, right? So you take 2 tokens in your wallet and you go and add them to PancakeSwap, for instance, right? In 2.0, you still decide which pairs that you want, right? So you get Ohm and Dai, and then you go and you give that to Olympus DAO. I think for 3.0, the difference is you're not even deciding which 2 pairs you want. You're essentially just giving them money, or you're just purchasing the LP token, and then they have full discretion into choosing which type of liquidity and which type of protocols they want to give funds to.
Thanks. That's really interesting. Yeah, just taking more of the stuff we've seen in TradFi, bringing it on chain, and now instead of investing in a vault on Yearn, I'm just delegating my strategy entirely. Ribbon, but squared.
Yeah, 100%.
Cool. Thanks.
Hey, Kyle, this is Charles. Hey,
Hey, Charles.
Thank you for the interesting presentation. And I guess the question that I have is, what is the meaning of the word liquidity in this context? You know, in finance, liquidity has got so many different meanings. And I guess the related question is, what's the ultimate source of the revenue from farming? So, you know, the revenue from farming for the person who invests is something equivalent to getting interest if you put your money in a bank. And if you put your money in a bank, then the bank lends it out, and it could be lending it out for speculation, that's giving people leverage, or it could be lending it out for real investment, like writing software, building a factory. And ultimately, the people who use the people who make the investment, they pay back more than they borrowed to the bank, and then the bank uses that to pay interest to the people who put their money in the bank. But what's the ultimate source of the return on investment that people get in DeFi?
Yeah, it's a good question. So for liquidity, I think it's similar to a bank, where you give them your money and you allow them to earn fees on that money. So for for PancakeSwap, I'll say there in particular, when you give them 2 of your tokens, like you give them $1,000 worth of Ethereum and $1,000 worth of DAI, then they can actually use those 2 tokens to earn money, right? And so the question is ultimately like, where does the money come from? And it comes from fees. So transaction fees. So as people want to speculate in crypto, or they want to invest in a specific project, they're charged a fee to swap. And so that fee that's generated from that swapping ultimately like flows up to the token holders and back to the treasury of projects.
It's interesting you say the money comes from fees, because if we look at the traditional economy as an analog, most people use credit cards. Credit cards are roughly a 2% payment. There's a huge fintech payments industry because everybody wants a piece of that 2%. But ultimately, it's 2% of the economy, and ultimately, it's a burden more than it is a source of economic growth.
I mean, is it though?
And everybody, all consumers and merchants would love it if somehow magically the cost of payments went down to 0.5% from 2%.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a fair argument there. I would say though, if we stick to this analogy around charging fees for swaps, without fees, no one would provide their tokens for swapping. And the long tail of projects that aren't currently existing on Coinbase or on these larger centralized exchanges wouldn't have funding. And so they couldn't start. And so that the engine of crypto wouldn't move forward without fees. The interesting thing about like Uniswap in particular is that the fees are on a scale. And so as these specific token pairs themselves get extremely popular, then the fees drop significantly versus these like more niche projects. So it's a burden, but the burden does create, I think, ultimate like value for everybody in the entire ecosystem.
So there is a question from Gary. So Gary, are you online? So can you maybe elaborate more about your question? Sorry, he's not here.
Was the question written down somewhere?
In Slido. So Slido.
Oh, Slido.
The question is about is some centralization with custodial solutions a way to have the simple UX to accelerate the onboarding the mass market onto Web3 and DeFi?
So the question was like, how do we simplify access for people for DeFi?
Yes.
You know, that's something that we're thinking about at dYdx right now as well. So we just launched our own app on iOS. We're working on our Android app as well too. I think part of the challenge is a challenge of regulations as well. So our product in particular is not available in the United States, but we are available, you know, in other countries. And so it's something that we are spending a lot of time on. I think, you know, as most growth teams are very familiar with, like the more you can improve your funnel, the higher leverage you have on all the work that you do. So I don't know if there's like a good answer just across the entire ecosystem. But for us, and I believe Uniswap is working on their own app as well, and then OpenSea, I believe, launched an app recently. And so I think the more we can become, you know, build applications and get those into people's hands, the easier we can make the onboarding for everything else.